Well, hello, Viva Birdos and everyone out there on the internet. We are so pleased to bring you another VEB podcast. This time with us live from the winter meetings out in San Diego is Belleville News-Democrat beat writer and reporter, Jeff Jones. Jeff, we're so glad that you could join us today.
I'm happy to do it. It's nice to have a change of scenery that's not looking at the walls inside the media room. So anything to make the day look a little different is a plus.
Right. I was going to ask you how the weather is out there, but we know the weather's probably fine out there, but you're probably stuck inside most of the time, aren't you?
You know, weirdly enough, it's rained like each of the last 3 days, which I think is illegal here most of the time.
Wow.
Only in the morning and very briefly, but it's been a little bit of a shock. Yeah.
Yeah. So along with Jeff, for those of you that are watching, you'll be able to see, but those of you that are listening, you won't. To my left, we've got Skyrick is here with us. Mike Jones has joined us, our transaction guru. Down in the left-hand corner, Blake Newberry is here as well. And Gabe, as always, still rocking the Miles Mikolas mustache, but it's looking nice, man. Real nice and tight these days. So it is a privilege to have you with us. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how things are kind of going there and what you're hearing from the Cardinals. And it's been quiet so far, but what's the vibe around Cardinals camp there at the San Diego hotel?
Yeah, I think the vibe is that it's going to go slowly until it goes quickly, which is to say that once the catcher gets figured out, then everything else sort of follows behind it. So, they've been very clear, throughout the winter, really, but especially this week as well. But their goal is to come away from here with a starting catcher. And, whether that's Sean Murphy, whether that's Wilson Contreras, whether it's maybe Christian Vasquez, we can find out. Look, there's a chance that we can find out while I am on this call. There's a chance we won't know by the time I leave here on Thursday morning. I would think it's probably closer to the former than the latter. But once that happens, that's sort of the skeleton key that unlocks what might happen in the remainder of this offseason.
So you think Contreras is going to be the key that opens this market? Is that what you're kind of suggesting?
No, I actually think probably it's Murphy. I think the question is going to be what the trade market looks like, and whether or not the Oakland A's do want to make the move with Murphy. It sure sounds like they do. Talking to Mark Kotsay yesterday, it sounded a lot like he would prefer to get that done sooner than later. There was obviously some light reputation of that and perhaps some laundering of a wish list that happened this morning in terms of, the A's might want some MLB players. Well, yeah, probably they're trading a pretty good catcher. I think that's probably the first move to get made, if only because a lot of the teams that would be interested in Contreras are also teams that are in on Murphy. And I think that teams that would largely prefer Murphy to Contreras, right? Younger, more cost-controlled, certainly cheaper, better defender. That's going to be a player who's going to want to move first before teams get more clarity on the rest of that
market. Interesting. So that report did kind of go down, and it's interesting that you mentioned it. I wasn't sure what the source was, but it sounds like it was Kotsay, that they are looking for major league talent in return. This kind of goes without saying.
Yeah, I should be real clear. Just that I don't know what the sourcing was of that report. Right, the conversation with Kotsay yesterday was in his press conference. He was asked a lot about Sean Murphy, and basically said, "Look, we've been through this before with Matt Olson. It's the guy that you mentioned, and they would, he at least said he would prefer to have it sorted sooner than later, which is I think a fair expectation, especially given the way that that's going to impact the rest of the market."
Right. So I guess without saying, go ahead, Mike. Yeah, jump in, man.
So Jeff, I wanted to ask you a question along the lines of, how they view the catcher position and how they think that Ivan Herrera, fits into it. So if they burn Herrera's third option next year, he will be eligible for a fourth minor league option in 2024. So does the fact that they're, looking at somebody like Murphy suggest to you that they still think that Herrera is still very far away and is not really ready to take on the lion's share of the backup duties at this point?
Well, so there's two parts of that, right? The first is that I think Herrera's option is getting burned next year regardless, unless you believe that Andrew Kisner is getting traded this winter, which I don't think that probably is very likely. So being able to have the fourth option on Herrera makes that a little bit easier. As far as the second part, look, Mo was pretty explicit last night. He was asked about Herrera and said, do we think he's ready right now? No. Do we think he will be someday? Yes. And so, if they were hoping, say, 2-3 years ago, that Ivan Herrera's readiness would sort of dovetail with Andy Yadier in his career. They got close, but I think between the pandemic and sort of maybe the way that there was a little bit of a stall out factor last year, they're going to be a year or so off on that. And so, in asking about, would you prefer a long-term catcher or more of a stopgap, they've been pretty clear that they prefer a longer-term guy, which, look, what's the best case scenario for Ivan Herrera, right? He becomes Sean Murphy. So if the actual Sean Murphy is available now, it seems that for a contending team, that probably is just the way that you would lean.
Jeff, I have a good question. Your best guess, what catcher the Cardinals getting to start next year? Your best guess.
If I was going to give you a best guess, it's 3:41 Pacific on Tuesday. So my best guess, I will say Sean Murphy.
Okay. Happy to hear that.
Yeah.
It just seems like they're in a position where they clearly have identified Murphy as top of the market and as the guy that they want. So the question is, how aggressive are they going to be in making that deal happen? And it seems like, given the way that they have talked about it, and given the way that sort of the rest of their off-season strategy hinges on that they would not ease off of that, right? And I think also the thing to say about that is that a move in the trade market certainly seems to fit this front office historically a lot better than the free agent market is. They're much more comfortable operating in the trade market. And so if the cost is going to be, in human capital and talent and years of control, they probably feel better calibrated to spend there than to suss out what dollars might look like for a Contreras or even for a Christian Vasquez if that market gets really crazy.
Do you think that they would really be, let's just suppose it doesn't work out with Murphy, right? And then the next name on the list is Contreras. I mean, do you think they really be prepared to do something with him as a fallback? Because Contreras, I had thought early on that he might have taken, because he loves Chicago so much, that he might have taken a qualified offer, but that he didn't take it suggests he wants that shot at free agency to get a long-term deal. But he also can't rely on him to catch the lion's share of the games like he used to. They used him as a DH. I mean, but wouldn't that sort of defeat the purpose of what they're trying to do? Because it sounds like they don't really want Kisner or Herrera having to catch 80 or so games, 60 games.
Yeah, my sense is not that Contreras is the second name on their list. My sense is that Vasquez is the second name on their list, and not because of quality of player, right? I think that in the aggregate, most people would agree that Wilson Contreras is a player you would maybe prefer to have on your roster to Christian Vasquez. But what I do think is true that from a Cardinals perspective and the way that they have both structured their roster and historically looked at that position, that maybe Vasquez fits more of that. And when you factor in cost and the way that the Contreras market might shape up, I think they would have Vasquez ahead of Contreras. Now, I say all that, and in the meantime, Ali Marmol just told us about an hour or so ago that he and Mo met in Florida with Wilson Contreras last week, and the meetings went well. Ali praised the fire, he said, and trusting that he would be a competitor, the guy that they know very well, obviously. So there has been contact there, and it's been positive contact. And we know that Contreras is interested. And so, look, there is interest on both sides, which seems to suggest a good match in the free agent market. All that being said, sifting through the data that we have and kind of looking at the historical context, the way the Cardinals operate, I think that they would have Vasquez ahead of Contreras, but I do think it's closer than maybe I thought it was, say, 90 minutes ago.
Interesting.
So it feels like I've heard a lot of rumors about Sean Murphy and then Vasquez and Contreras. Have you heard much about the Cardinals and any interest with the Blue Jays catchers?
So I think the problem with the Blue Jays catchers, and I think we also got this clarified a little bit in talking with Ollie this afternoon, is that the Blue Jays don't seem motivated to move Kirk. I think they would prefer to move Jansen. And I don't think the Cardinals are in the business of trading Lars Nootbaar for Danny Jansen, nor Gorman. Burleson, maybe, depending on who you talk to and what they think the Cardinals' evaluation of Burleson is right now. So I don't know that those pieces necessarily sync up as clean as you might like. I think if the Blue Jays were serious about moving Kirk, then maybe there is a match to be made. But if the Blue Jays want to move Jansen, then I'm not so sure that match is there.
By the way, not to derail the catching conversation, but just to kind of throw this out here, because some of you probably haven't seen this. Cody Bellinger just now signed with the Cubs, probably about the time that I got on here, about 30 minutes ago. So that kind of, for those of you that are listening and watching, that might kind of place where we are. Tuesday, late afternoon, 5:30 Central Time is when we're recording this with Jeff. kind of in between, a conversation with Marmol and one coming with John Mozeliak. So there'll be more news breaking after this thing.
Yeah. If you want a good sense of what the behind the scenes looks like here, as I was packing my laptop up to move upstairs to a window where I could tether the internet to have this conversation, that news was just breaking. I'm sitting very near some of the Cubs writers, and one of them had to abandon her French fries half eaten to go do work. So there are hot and rapidly cooling fries that have now been abandoned in service of the winter meetings.
Wow. You might need to rescue those fries, Jeff. It wouldn't bother us at all if you.
it might bother her a little bit.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, maybe we'll come back to Bellinger because I'm actually kind of glad that one's off the table now for the Cardinals. That seemed like a trouble waiting to happen. But I had two questions regarding Murphy and the timeline here. If it is true, let's just assume that it is, that the A's are looking for major league talent. I would assume, first of all, that would be cost-controlled major league talent from Murphy.
Right.
But it actually seems to me, and you could just kind of give me your vibes here and what you think, but it seems to me that kind of deal lines up just as well, if not better, for the Cardinals than a prospect-oriented deal, because it would allow them to keep Wynn and Walker, and maybe someone like Graceffo might go, but they got quite a few MLB-ready, long-term, cost-controlled guys that they could potentially move from with depth underneath them. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would. I think you identified the correct issue for the Cardinals is that, they're sort of top of the market prospects or guys that they don't, what's new, right? But those are guys that they don't want to move, or in the case of Jordan Walker, are not going to move. I think in the case of Mason Wynn, the thought that he would move for a catcher, I'm very skeptical that would happen given that there are free agent options. And so to spend Wynn to do that, would be unlike them, I think, in kind of the way that they evaluate players. So I agree, because there are, the Cardinals do have kind of a bevy of controlled or controllable players who can fill out a major league roster and who can be effective, efficient major league players, and who on, a non-playoff team might get the opportunity to make 30 starts or to get 500 at bats and could, either establish themselves or not and sink or swim, right? But the Cardinals do have a lot of those. 4A is the wrong term because there are talents like Nolan Gorman is not a 4A player. He's a development player, right? But a guy who right now today is maybe a little bit caught in between in that sort of 4A spot where for a team that's going to lose 105 games anyway, you can let him go out there and strike out 205 times and take his 35 homers and figure it out.
Right. So second question along those same lines, if Murphy is potentially number one on their list, and then there's Vasquez probably down there with Contreras. I kind of feel like Contreras is sort of a budget breaker for them for the season. They would have to invest most of their offseason budget just in a catcher. Probably not something they want to do. If that's the case, and they got the tools to do it, and I realize it's only been a couple days here, but what's the holdup? Why didn't they go Goldschmidt on this one and get this deal done even before the winter meetings or the first day?
Yeah, I think part of the holdup is you're seeing teams sort of trying to drive up prices, and there is a wider catching market for all of the Cardinals' benefit in acquiring Paul Goldschmidt. That was not really a very broad market, right? And as far as we know, the Cardinals were about the only team involved in that, which suggests that that was sort of it was less of a Paul Goldschmidt is on the market and more of a what will it cost us to get him from you. Whereas in the case of Sean Murphy, for example, there are a lot of teams involved in that conversation. And, there are a lot of teams that are sort of dancing around the same group of guys: Cardinals, Astros, Red Sox, Murphy, Vasquez, Contreras. This is all roughly the same group of teams. And even if you told me today that those three teams would end up with those three catchers and pick the spot, that would make a lot of sense to me.
Interesting. The rest of you guys got anything on the catcher stuff, or should we move on?
Well, Jeff, one quick thing. Do you think it's possible, Jeff, that in any trade that the A's would want to undertake involving Sean Murphy, that they'd ask for a catcher back? In other words, that it might, if we did trade for him, it would cost us Herrera?
I guess that's possible. I would say, though, that, again, I'm talking to Mark Gotze yesterday, there was a lot of conversation about Shea Langeliers, right? The reason that the Murphy is available is because the A's like Langeliers, and that's probably their top prospect, and a guy who they could trust behind the plate. And so for them to do that for another sort of AAA catcher who maybe wasn't fit in their immediate plans would be difficult. I think it probably is more likely to be to just either promote a second backup or sign a more traditional league minimum Austin Romine-esque backup catcher to sort of partner with Langley as well. You'd want that kind of veteran presence maybe for a guy that young.
Understood.
I believe they have another huge catching prospect in Triple
They do.
A as well. Yeah. So they kind of already have their Even Herrera in their system, aside from Shea Langoliers.
All right. Let's move on. Jeff, and you might have mentioned it in one of your recent articles of talking about shortstop, but today it was sort of interesting. There was at least some on the internet buzz about Dansby Swanson and the Cardinals. What are you getting, not just about Swanson, but just about the Cardinals and shortstop? Is there really anything to that, or is that just rumors?
So the two things I would say about that are, number one, you may have picked up on the fact that the Swanson conversation started basically immediately after Trey Turner signed with the Phillies, which is to say that if I were a person who was invested in Dansby Swanson's marketplace, I would be looking for ways to increase the competition for him. And so doing that immediately after both a shortstop and a landing spot come off the board, one way to do that would be to suggest that that market is broader than previously imagined. The second part of that, though, in conversation with the Cardinals last night, there is a universe where, trading off of their roster to acquire a catcher is a real possibility. And if you look at sort of where the redundancies are on the roster, some of that is middle infield, right? So you're talking about Edman, Donovan, Gorman. From a value perspective, there are maybe some similarities for these players, rough similarities in terms of value perspective heading into next season. Edman obviously is the one of the three who you would trust to play shortstop. But if one of the other two were to be involved in a trade for a catcher, does the team improve by moving Edman back to second and signing a shortstop, especially when you consider that, that Sean Murphy is going to play next season at roughly $3.5 million or so. There are definitely ways to do that and ways to flex the resources that make that happen. So that probably is a track that the Cardinals would pursue. And I think the reason that you hear them talk about in the context of Swanson as opposed to, say, Correa or Bogarts is that there's really an expectation that Correa and Bogarts are going to hit, if not the top of the market, pretty close to the top of the market, right? Pretty close to the top of their projections. Whereas Swanson is a guy who, if the other two land in maybe preferred spots or high dollar spots, is Swanson the guy that really only has one share, right? Is it Atlanta or nowhere? And so, because that opened up a possibility for them to seize a value perspective, right? And I think that's the way to look at it is, if they have to trade a middle infielder, or they do trade him, they don't have to, but they trade a middle infielder for a catcher, and Swanson doesn't have as wide a market as perhaps he might hope, then does it make sense for them to sort of swoop in and do basically what the Twins did last year with Correa, right? Whether that's 3, 4, 5 year deals, some opt-outs at a reasonable AAV, because I think when you saw the AAV that Trey Turner got from the Phillies, that benefits the Phillies, but it doesn't help the other shortstops on the market, right? Because that's not, it's going to be very hard if you're repping Dansby Swanson to make a good argument for why his AAV should exceed Trey Turner's. And so that tamps it down a little and could put the Cardinals in a position to pounce if the market for Swanson doesn't develop following those other guys. It's a Byzantine way of looking at player acquisition, but it's the reality of sort of the on the ground way that the market shifts, right? Like if X happens, then Y becomes more likely, and all of these variables shift along the way.
Yeah. Gabe, that seems like an interesting transition to the question you asked me about. Go ahead and throw that out there.
Basically, over the years, it seems like whenever agents, I will say, who feed information to reporters, they'll usually throw the Cardinals as an option for somebody who will make like over $100 million. I'm all like, why are the Cardinals the choice when we all know they're not going to end up signing them? Is it like, I just don't understand, because Matt Holiday's the only guy who signed over $100 million with the Cardinals, right, I believe. So it's weird that we're always
Goldschmidt as an extension, but otherwise,
yeah. But it's weird that we're always throwing it as an option for like there was a 5 years ago post about Eric Hosmer and how we were in on Eric Hosmer, and I was like, no, we weren't. So it's just weird. Like, do you have any idea why we're constantly a team that is promoted as an option?
It's because the Cardinals are really hardline about not back channeling information to reporters. Like I can tell you, look, if Mo was pulling people aside after gatherings that were on camera and then sliding them stuff, I would know about it, right? And I can tell you that doesn't happen. And so the Cardinals are relatively locked down in terms of the way that they handle information and the way that they address the market. And so they're a very convenient kind of. They're a really good mystery team because they're never going to resolve the mystery one way or another. And so to utilize them in that way, they can become a leverage point really to no one's consequence, especially if theoretically, they get a heads up that this is about to happen. If for example, the relationships with representatives are good enough that they can say, this conversation is about to happen, then sure, that they know it's going to happen and they can preempt it. And the other thing too is like, look, they do their jobs, they check in. And so to parse the truth of some of these statements, what does it mean to be in the shortstop market? Does it mean that, one text gets sent that says, hey, let us know what this is trending, and or all of a sudden, are they in the market? Maybe, depending on how you read that text.
Thank you.
That's a great answer. Yeah. I never really thought about that they're used not because of their potential to one day get involved and make a move, but because they're so tight-lipped. That I never occurred.
Well, and part of it too is that they're credible, right? Like it is credible to say that the Cardinals would be involved in that corner of the market. Whereas if you were an agent and you were trying to drum up interest and hey, I think Cleveland's in on this guy who's going to get paid 180 million. No, they're not. So the reality check for that happens pretty quickly.
Anything else on shortstops, guys, or can we just throw that one in the awaiting bin where it belongs?
I'm curious. So if the Cardinals go with Murphy, they still have a lot of their free agent money left. If it's not Swanson, is there any indication where they might pivot in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think the name that you should probably have on the top of your mind is Masataka Yoshida. That is the name that I would be keeping an eye on if I was talking about where the Cardinals would look in the free agent market. The relationship the Cardinals have with Oryx is strong. It goes back a long way. It's a couple of decades now. They've had some exchanges with coaches and scouts back and forth. And Matt Slater, who works in the Cardinals front office, has a relationship, a player development relationship there with Oryx. That's a player who checks really almost every box for them. And the challenge there is going to be it's often hard for teams in the Midwest to sign Japanese free agents. The reality is, unless you're Chicago, that can be a hard sell sometimes for folks. So the Cardinals are going to would have to lean on those relationships and hope that they've kind of develop being a sort of goal city in the mind of a player like Yoshida, and I think they probably have to some extent. And so that would be the guy that I would track. Now that's not going to be imminent. The teams have 30 days to put their offer in and get the posting fee up. So that's not going to be a this week move. So, but that would be a move that I think would logically follow what they would want to do this offseason.
Just for those that don't know, because we've written about it a little bit on the site. I think Blake wrote about it. Can you guys, either you, Jeff, or you also, Blake, jump in there? Who is Yoshida? Like what does he play? What's his profile? I can tell you, but I'll let you guys do it.
Yeah, I mean, he's a left-handed outfielder who walks a lot and doesn't strike out, and hit like 360 last year in PP, right? So, there are translation factors that trains that over to Major League Baseball, but the guy gets a lot of hits, draws a lot of walks, hits a lot of homers, and Derek Gould was making a face at me over the course of my left eye. Derek's ahead of you, Birdos. He said hi, he waved. That's basically what he does. He plays outfield and hits left-handed.
Can he play center? I can't remember, to be honest, off the top of my head.
From what I read, he's not going to add much on defense or base running. He's pretty much a bat guy. That's just
and he's 5'8". Is that right? Is he actually 5'8"? Or is that Coda that's that short? No, he is, isn't he?
He's on paper 5'8". I can admit to saying I've not met him, so I can't tell you. As far as I know, he's not here. So I don't know if he's an on paper 5'8" and in reality 5'5". But yeah, not a real tall guy. But look, gets a lot of walks. Who needs to be tall?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah. At least over there, his power was respectable. It was like 25 homers or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would translate to MLB ballparks, but
I asked Dan I asked Dan Zimborski about it, but I didn't get a response. So maybe when the Zips projections come out for the Cardinals, we might be able to catch him and get those if there's more rumors, more connections. But so far, I haven't been able to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not really similar in terms of like stylistic player, but just in terms of translation factor, you think about the way that Seiya Suzuki played for the Cubs last year, and he was a factor. He's an impact player. He's not, an MVP candidate. But I think the Cubs would say they were happy with that acquisition and they're happy to see him develop. And that's the way you think about him, right? And realistically, for a Cardinals team that has it has the corners locked down the way they have it locked down, he is a supplemental bat who lengthens your lineup and hits left-handed. You can hit second or sixth. Say that you trade for Sean Murphy or sign Wilson Contreras and they hit fifth, and then all of a sudden, Yoshida hits sixth, and you look up and you got a lineup, right? So there are ways where he fits kind of the pieces this team needs, if not a centerpiece type player.
Yeah, I did a sort of a rough translation based off Suzuki's stats, and it was like translated like a 14% K rate based off how Suzuki played. It was about a 14% K rate, 9% walk rate, and like a 150 isolated power. And any comparable player I could find was pretty much an above average hitter, about 105 to 125, depending on what their batting average on balls in play was. So it's a pretty good bet to be an above average hitter at the very least, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think that if you were to ask the Cardinals, they would probably say that is roughly what they're hoping for from Lars Nootbaar, for example, in 2023. And so if you have two Lars Nootbaars in your lineup, that's a deeper lineup. It's a deeper team for sure. And it allows you to do some mix and match. Maybe it allows you to put Dylan Carlson in a position where he's not a platoon hitter, but he's maybe better able to succeed at some things. Maybe it puts you in a position where if you don't get the bounce back from Tyler O'Neill that you want, you can roll out three lefty hitting outfielders in a given day and have O'Neill as an option off the bench or as a DH or whatever. It just gives them that flexibility and that depth, but quality depth, right? And not like nice guy who liked him was very helpful, not Corey Dickerson depth, like good MLB player depth.
Yeah. I want to open the floor a little bit. You guys, we don't often get beat writers at our beck and call here. So any other questions you guys had for Jeff? Well, we're not letting him go yet, but I did want you guys to be able to get some questions in for your own interests.
Yeah, I'll ask a question. So the Rule 5 draft is tomorrow. Now, the whole thing about the timing is a little bit different this year because typically the non-tender date would have been a few days before the Rule 5 draft, but it was pushed up several months, and that actually, impacted what some moves that people could make a little bit. But is there anybody who has not been protected that you think maybe if somebody was taken in the major league portion that we might regret it? It's on your radar, Jeff?
Yeah, the guy I have in mind is Johan Paniagua, right? That is a guy who I was curious whether or not would get protected or not, and didn't, because the Cardinals, I think, are gambling. Basically, that the Perdomo lightning bolt is not going to strike twice. Really, honestly, the profile is very similar to what happened when the Padres took Luis Perdomo directly out of a really good high A season. And because they weren't really going to try to win anyway, they could absorb a 6 ERA and 170 innings of their staff and then have control of the player. And Perdomo, I think, sort of developed into an average to below average major league pitcher for a while and is now still kind of kicking around. So that's, not to say that Paniagua can't exceed that or can't be, a better pitcher than that or a worse pitcher than that, right? But that would be the guy of the guys who are available who I think the Cardinals would feel the most if he were to be taken. There's also some guys that, could be major, like a Tommy Parsons type, if there's a team out there that really likes him. Kyle Leahy, right? A guy who maybe if the team thinks that he has really one good pitch that they like a lot, but they can hone in their bullpen. Those sort of right on the cusp call up, the James Nails of the world who aren't on the 40-man, right? Those are the guys who maybe a team could lose that another team might like, that you look up all of a sudden in August and Kyle Leahy's, thrown 35 innings of below or of above average relief for some non-contending team. You go, yeah, the Cardinals would kind of like to have that. That's entirely possible.
And the follow-up to that is they have 37 men on their 40-man roster, the Cardinals do, which opens up the theoretical possibility for the Cardinals to take somebody. Do you have any idea? I mean, I guess it depends from year to year, but do you get a sense that the Cardinals are even interested in using the Rule 5 draft. I know they hold 40-man spots pretty precious, and you'd think that if they weren't going to protect somebody like Paniagua, maybe they wouldn't want to use it on somebody they couldn't option. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on if you thought, given that there is space, if they might be in the running for something like that.
I do. I couldn't for the life of me tell you who it might be, just to get my arms around the depth of who every team would have. That there's no way. I tried briefly. No, I can't do this. That's not going to happen.
Sure.
But no, I do think they might, and for much the same reason, right? If there are relievers, for example, especially like a lefty who they like somewhere, who's got a pitch that they really like, and I feel like they can sort of hone that in and work through that. Why not take a shot? Why not bring that guy to camp? Especially because like they do have 3 open spots now. There are probably ways to clean that up. And look, again, it's now 4:06 in San Diego on Tuesday. Maybe they have 2 more open spots in 2 hours if they trade a couple 40-man guys for a catcher, right? But there are possibilities for changes and flexibility to happen. So sure, I think that if the Cardinals took somebody, I would not be shocked. I'm trying to remember the last time they took somebody in a major league portion of the Rule 5. Was it Matt Bowman? Was he the last guy? Off the top of my head, he's the last guy I can think of. So, it's been a while since they've done it. But wouldn't shock me.
Let's hit then real quickly a few things that have come out both last night and Mo's sit down and then today from Ollie. Ollie mentioned, and this kind of no surprise, Lars Nootbaar penciled in right now as an everyday starting outfielder, according to Ollie. How serious do you think they are about that idea of every day, or are they still looking to create platoons, particularly in the outfield?
So that to me was interesting in as much as if he is an everyday outfielder, you would presume that as we sit here that O'Neill and Carlson would be the other 2, which means that Brendan Donovan is not one of them, which I guess puts Donovan at second and then makes Gorman the DH, and also Juan Yepes exists. And you're right, there are down roster implications to calling Nootbaar an everyday outfielder in the way that it affects 3-4 other guys who are on your roster. The other part of it that we think we should pair with this is that one of the first things I asked Ollie today was who his starting center fielder would be if he was making that lineup, and he said it was wide open was the phrase that he used. Which the fact that he didn't say Dylan Carlson, I think, is worth a note. And Nootbaar is a guy who they're going to give a shot there. Frankly, I think all of Nootbaar, O'Neill, and Carlson as of today are going to get reps in center in spring, and they're going to see who fits the position best. Nootbaar is a guy who kind of learned that on the job last year. I think the first couple times we saw him play center were a little bit of a surprise to us, but I think acquitted himself fairly well in that spot. And look, the other guy to talk about here is talking about the outfield is Jordan Walker, because if Jordan Walker gets away onto the roster in spring, and he very well might, and they have been very clear that they're going to give him that option, that opportunity, that's another starting outfielder, right? And then all of a sudden, the number of chairs that are available, you pull one away. So that's also a consideration. Now, again, talking to Mo last night, he was asked about Walker. He said, yeah, he's an outfielder, but not a center fielder. So if he's in one of the corners, well, okay, then you're talking about 2 other spots, and one of them has to be center. So that, I think, is where a lot of the commitment to Nootbaar comes in.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to mention that because Walker did play some center last year in Double-A, and I didn't catch his defensive alignment in the AFL. I knew he was playing the outfield, but I didn't know if he played some center in the AFL as well. I thought he might be in the competition.
It was funny, like you talked about him playing center in that conversation last night when Mo was asked about it. He mentioned that he saw him at the end of the year in Springfield, and his comment was that he'd gotten pretty big, I think was the description that he gave, which is to say that he put on a lot of muscle toward the end of the year, and you don't see a whole lot of like 6'5", 250 carved out of wood center fielders. That would be an entry. I mean, that's Mike Trout, I guess. But other than that, you don't see a lot of guys who are that size and shape playing center field. And so I think that's why Jordan Walker is heading for a corner.
So if he wouldn't commit to Dylan Carlson being a center fielder, does that mean we're possibly searching for a center fielder? Or are you talking about Nootbaar or O'Neill playing center field?
Yeah, I think more of that. I think it's more the possibility of would they prefer to have one of those 2 guys in center over Carlson, which, I mean, granted, that does surprise me, right? Because part of the decision with Bader, or part of the advertised reason for the decision with Bader last year was they were happy with the way that Carlson was progressing and happy with how he was handling center. Then he got hurt, and then the rest of his year kind of tapered off. But I still think, like, I guess the thing to say about that too is, does Dylan Carlson have to hit righties better to be the starting center fielder? Because if he doesn't, is that a guy who you make your center fielder, or is that a guy who is in, I don't know about the short side of a platoon, but maybe not the strongest side of a platoon? And is that better in the corners? And, because the Cardinals historically, again, talk about defense up the middle. If Nootbaar is the guy who they see as the everyday outfielder, would they prefer to make him the center fielder and just sort of take command and be the general in the outfield? I think that's a possibility. Or they're going to sign Kevin Kiermaier in 2 hours. What the hell do I know?
Reported here first. Yeah.
That'd be something.
All right. You guys got some more questions? Otherwise, I've got one more. Blake, you got anything?
No, I was actually interested about the Jordan Walker answer, so that covered a lot of it for me.
Okay. All right, Jeff, you're about to sit down with Mo here in a few minutes. What are you going to ask him today?
Well, where's the catcher, big guy? Can we start with that? No, I mean, I think that it's going to be a lot of that same conversation. I do think that there is something to, the conversation with Ollie and the way that he talked about Nootbaar and the way he talked about the outfield is going to be part of that. The one phrase I think we should probably mention here, when Ollie and talking about a catcher, he did use the phrase a catcher for the middle of the order at one point. Now that's not Christian Vasquez, right? That's Murphy or that's Contreras, which again, at this point, it's not a secret. They want Murphy. Murphy's their guy. Murphy is the guy who can hit fifth or sixth, and that's a middle of the order guy for them. But that's part of the conversation. And I think also it's worth asking about Yoshida and what the Cardinals think of the posting system, because the last time the Cardinals signed a player who had been posted, it was so Taguchi. So it's been a while since they've been involved in the posting system. And so and it's changed in the most recent CBA. The penalties have gone down a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that would be an interesting conversation to have now that is official.
Do you get any sense of what his posting fee will be? Over 25 million, under 50? Because there's some it jumps and changes right around in there. I just saw the numbers that came across. It does.
Today, so. It's not a significant change, because if it's under 25, it's 20% of the deal. Between 25 and 50, it's 20%, up to 25, and 15% between 15% of the difference. And then if it's over 50, it's 20% up to 25, and then 15% up to 50, and then 12% of the extra. Right. Suzuki's deal was something like 75-ish, something in that neighborhood. And so, maybe he's about that level. Maybe he's a little below it. The point is, it's not, I think, probably significant enough, talking about a difference of maybe 2 or 3 million, that it would affect a lot of it.
Yeah.
And he's 2 years older than Suzuki, so I expect him to be less than Suzuki.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, but you would just sitting here today. It sounds like you would say that the posting fee is not going to stop them from potentially pursuing him.
I wouldn't think so. I wouldn't think it would be particularly onerous. Now, again, you're talking, if it's let's say the deal is like $460 off the top of my head. That means the posting fee would be what? Talking about 12. You're talking about 15 or so was the posting fee, so it's 75 all in. I think that would be in the reasonable range for them.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Guys, you got anything else for Jeff?
I don't think so. Thanks a lot, Jeff. It was a real treat.
Yeah, it really was.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I appreciate it. It was nice. It was nice to change my view. And there's a palm tree behind me, so you can see I'm really in San Diego. As I hold my laptop at face level, because I don't have like a table or anything to put it on. This has been a lot of fun.
Good. Well, hey, man, you got anything to promote? Anything to let us know? You've got some great stuff over at the Belleville News-Democrat. So
yeah, bnd.com. Check that out. Well, we coverage there throughout the winter meetings. I should also mention the St. Louis Baseball Writers dinner is back this year. If you are interested in attending the dinner, all that info is at stlouisbbwaa.com, stlouisbbwaa.com. All the ticket stuff is there. We added a VIP event this year. There's a cocktail hour an hour before dinner with a Q&A with Ali Armo and Rick Hummel that I think is going to be a whole lot of fun that folks should go check out. But definitely check out the dinner. If you're buying Christmas presents, I can tell you, as someone who's buying a ticket for his own mother for Christmas, it's a good Christmas gift. People will appreciate it.
Wow, great. Yeah. Well, Jeff, thanks again, man, for coming on, and we really do appreciate this. Just so you know, and everyone else knows, I'm going to try to get this out as soon as we can before more news breaks. So the podcast should post. Do what?
It's a good plan. It's a good idea.
Yeah, it is. It's gonna be way out of date by the time people read it tomorrow morning. So it's gonna come out tonight. But again, Jeff, we're glad to have you on, and we hope to have you on maybe again later in the year when we talk spring training stuff. So
happy to do it anytime, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Well,
we'll see y'all later.
To all of you out of Viva, Birdos, have a great day, guys. We'll be hearing from you soon.